Hello everyone, my name is Norris Lin. I'm a concept artist working in the game industry. So for today, I would like to do a quick tutorial focusing on designing a some kind of a sci-fi console design where you would see a lot of, like, for example, in the game Doom, they will have a lot of these like set dressing prop design, especially these kind of control panel, where you will go there and interact with to do certain things, to unlock the door, to talk to somebody over the monitor or something like that. A lot of, in the game, if you play first-person shooter games, you can find a lot of those things throughout the games, and that's something that I would like to show, you know, um, trying to do a page of uh, some ideations, designs based on that concepts. And here are the reference I would like to go through a little bit, because when you're thinking about the console, monitor design, it's pretty much like a station where you interact with. So I found that some of the medical devices and equipment are quite interesting to look at, compared to a regular computer with keyboard and monitor. I think it has just a lot more interesting shapes and forms that I could probably like referencing from. I know, so for this area, I do love the layout of interesting arrangement of different stuff, right? Like we have kind of a keyboard interacts panel where there's a interesting, very old-fashioned monitor which is very thick. I guess that's different than the daily monitor that we use for a computer. I guess it's designed to be thicker because it might contain more important, like, intricate technology inside there. So something like that. But overall, the images and reference you see here are pretty much like the interesting kind of arrangement of things that I like to referencing from. You have these a little bit more tall, kind of a slim profile, contrast with this kind of more thicker, like more heavy, steady base. And there are a couple more reference I found it's quite interesting. A lot of the medical exam equipment quite uh, interesting. I like the way that the form is kind of soft and organic, but somehow it still has certain contrast of the hard surface area. Um, for instance, like these cameras are pretty interesting reference as well. You have these a little bit more rounded shapes, and whereas this one is more just boxier, more like those 80s um, products aesthetic to it. Some of these I like the round shapes of that, and some camera are interesting with um, very interesting way of designing those joints. So somehow you can rotate and turn around to have control the aiming direction of the camera, something like that. And overall, the supportive arm like that, it's always a really cool shapes that you can push the contrast and the overall silhouette, right? And for last area of these images are pretty much focusing on, I like to look at how exactly human eye interacts with this device. So the referencing, you can see it range from some, like, it feels like some kind of a military communication device, uh, where it's probably like some kind of a hard drive you can store the data or record it. I am not certain about the exact function of it, but overall, I just want to get the over aesthetic and proportion to it. And this one is super interesting as well. You know, there are some knobs and controls, but they are arranged in a very interesting way, and you can see the design of this case. It's kind of following those forms around. You can see triangle, square, triangle, and then the edge would be has a very subtle bevel, like a kind of a form here. So that's interesting. You know, always think about, you know, when there's essential things for you to interact. Maybe, you know, the overall case design could be designed with that form, right? Form follow function. It's kind of like that aspect. A lot of like, I guess it's some kind of interior ship from World War II or submarine, where they always have a very complex monitors and interactive devices. They are just so interesting to look at. Um, Great range of, you know, large shapes, contrast with some medium and even smaller shapes like look bottoms or things that you can interact with. It's just it has so much dynamic to it, you know, compared to the modern day stuff. Like, you know, a lot of modern sci-fi movie, you see the UI are quite like, it's almost like a digital projected hologram where you are interacting in the air without the actual physical device. But this is why I like, right? I like something that's more analog, something you can feel it, you can touch it, something that has an interesting form and shapes. So a lot of like more like old device like these oscillator. Um, Not exactly know how it works, but I just like the overall construction of it. With, you know, you don't know what these buttons are for if you don't not professional user of that, or even like that the keyboard arrangement are kind of interesting, the way that designed by, you know, you can kind of think about, okay, maybe when you put your fingers here, you know, like this area are probably controlled by your thumb, you know. It's like the forms are following like the human kind of design, right? So these are interesting. So I'm gonna base on these reference and start doing some thumbnail sketches, and, you know, hopefully we can generate some interesting ideas here based on those reference, plus, you know, a very common control sci-fi console. In, you know, in a lot of these sci-fi games you see a lot of these control panel things that I'm always love to do something like that. So yeah, that's kind of the topic for this tutorial, and let's move on to the next part. All right, so let's start with some ideation drawings, right? So one thing I would like to start with is that I would first thing I would like to focus is pretty much like the overall proportions and forms. Um, I might do two drawing passes on these. First pass would be figure out the overall proportion of, you know, the stuff, right? We want to have large, medium, and small kind of mindset in your mind to creating a more pleasing way, a pleasing visual of the concept. You know, we don't want to do something that has too much like even sizes and shapes and form like that. So first of all, I like to just overall sketch out with a very simple forms and shapes. For example, you know, I can start with this first one with probably like a larger monitor, and probably just do a standard like base in here. You can see when I'm doing the sketch, I kind of just think about the overall layout and silhouette. You know, I wouldn't put too much time on the detail, because that's just not not the things that we should focus on first. I was just blocking out the overall composition and see if I get a nice presentation here. And based on, like, once I have these larger font, I can start just adding more smaller area, right? Like, okay, maybe there's another smaller panel, and maybe it's always great to revisit back your reference and to see, if there is anything that's interest that we can find and use it based on those. I also have another reference board that's just more images from on my, like, what's that, GeoRef board. And the reason why is that just the Photoshop references, sometimes it's limited, but in here I usually put these in my second monitor so I can kind of see, like, the overall range reference that I have. So if I see something interesting, I can just incorporate in there. So yeah, let's just continue sketching that. And you can see right now I am just sketching out like that layout. Imagine we are standing in here. Look at this thing, right? And trying to feel, what's the overall arrangement of the things in here. So right now I have these 3 forms, and sometimes you can always think about, okay, maybe I have a larger form, medium form, a medium form, a little bit smaller form. But right now the shapes are quite similar in sizes, like especially like these 3. So if I can find a way to stay away from that, I would probably like modify this form and maybe create some kind of an interesting angular form like that. So maybe these hopefully become a larger form, and maybe I can keep that thing as it is, but for the base here I can make it somehow reduce the volume, maybe try to create more interesting way shapes as well. Not only reduce volume, we are kind of make it something hopefully more interesting. But again, I can see I'm not focusing any detail yet. I'm just trying to blocking out the shapes here, and maybe I can start indicate like the volume here, right? And in here I think it just overall need more stuff in here. So let's see what interesting form I can try to introduce in here. Maybe some rounded form, and eventually I also want to include some kind of a keyboard or interactive parts underneath here, and it's kind of layout like this angle, so it's kind of like position for things that you can type or do things about it. But right now the form are quite simple, a lot of box as a initial like block out, and that's the reason why is that it's I would always start with some more like just over initial more primitive form, so later on if I want to add or edit, just modify things, it would be much easier, because you can always think about that box is like the initial how do you say that, perspective guideline, right? Like, and you can see when I do a sketch, I usually don't do perspective grid, because I find that sometimes just quite distracting for my eye, and it might affect the way I sketch and think. But for me, I like to just go ahead and do some sketch, because as long as you have those fundamental knowledge of the perspective, you should be able to kind of keep the perspective simple, nothing too dramatic, nothing like super, hardcore like dynamic perspective. As long as nothing too crazy, it should still be easy to follow. And in here maybe I can design some kind of put something that like some kind of a camera, like a webcam camera in here. But right now, not sure about the form here, so I was just trying to sketch out the form and think, okay, maybe there is a small camera feature in there, and that thing is kind of connects attached to here, and start carving into the inner detail if you want, right? And at the same time, again, like I'm still keep these in a very sketching kind of quality to it, because you don't want to go super tight initially, because that's just, if you start super refined initially, everything will become super slow. Because if you change something, if you change one thing, everything has to be very, very precise, and that's something that will slow you down quite a lot. So that's why we do thumbnails or sketch. Like, this is not quite a thumbnail, but but overall it's more about the sketch quality. That's something that it can still present the idea in a very efficient way, but it doesn't take you too long to draw this. And if if you want to edit that thing, it still be very flexible, right? So maybe right now, trying to make this panel feels more interesting, I attach another things in here. Maybe that's more of a thinner kind of monitor that can still showing something in there, right? Some kind of a more high-tech monitor. Or usually be more thinner. So not sure if you want to add some thickness to this keyboard. So right now, look at it. Maybe find some interesting reference here and see how can I get some more interesting form instead of just the plan, right? So maybe give it a little bit of thickness if you like. And the aesthetic I'm going for is quite a little bit Kid Bash feel, because I just like the Kid Bash quality. Like a lot of the interactive design on the earlier like 90s movies like Matrix or things like that, they always have very those Kid Bash kind of aesthetic, which is what I love. And since right now I'm editing these base, because I do think this large size of the monitor, it need more extended back for somehow provide more support. Maybe I can try something that and I might shrink these entire things just to see if I can get a better proportion here. Maybe a little bit offset like that. I don't know. That's why we do sketch. It's just so much easy to modify it and to change the form. Cool. I don't want to spend too long on this one. I might just move on and see what other design I can come up with. And let's start with, I just make it that smaller. And the other one I can do something more flat, wider, right? Because we have that more vertical one. So what if right now this is more like wider in general. And let's think about like the base could be something that's interesting too, or even that. Something like that, more heavy duty base, keep the form somehow simple first. Later on we can modify it and cut into forms to become something more interesting. But right now, I just want to make things simple. That's cool. Not sure if I want to give it some kind of a wheel, but let's try that with this one. Looks like these are, it has a smaller and larger wheel, which is quite interesting. So I'm gonna do that the same. So once I have this base, so how could I make it more interesting, right? You can see there's no limitation on where shall I add more stuff. You can always find an interesting way to combine things together. So maybe, that joint is kind of connects in here. And probably something, let's put more stuff. Another mess here. Trying to create more volumes. Because like, it's just how interesting that, your form start with this base. There's some kind of a joint connect to that in a very, very interesting way. Or even something like that. It kind of have that asymmetrical kind of aesthetic. That's what I like. So in here maybe do more stuff. Connect maybe a super wider keyboard or something between tracks. Not worried about if the line is straight or not, because right now I'm still doing the block out, and sometimes, when your style tend to be more like, at least this first pass is a little bit sketch feel, people can, the viewer would be okay if the line is not everything is like so perfect, because it somehow become more of a sketchy style where things can be drawn more loosely, and people are gonna still feel okay, that's a straight line, or at least the form is like more of an industrial produce, but it's just a sketch. So I just introduce more volumes in here on the back, kind of connect to something here. And let's see, so once I have that, I find more interesting joints in here. Now later on we can always feature some more monitors and smaller stuff, but right now again it's all that initial layout, right? Stuff like attached to the side with some joints, more buttons. Maybe this one I can do something, extend it from this direction. Trying to find a more interesting form here. A lot of time it's just, you know, experimenting shapes and form. Trying to bend this thing in a weird way and see what interesting form I can get. Maybe when it's bent, it's connected to something, some other joints or something. Just visually trying to push that fun, you know, form aspect. And maybe that is connected to a smaller camera or something. But right now I'm just start with some simple form first. Not quite sure if I like the connection of that, but just let's leave it there, right? Because I know that later on if I don't want it, I can change it quite easily. But right now I just want to get this dynamic kind of arrangement in here. And not really, you know, not 100% commit to anything yet. It's just experimenting and all that. Maybe a super weird thing attached that there could be a monitor or something, you know, some kind of a screen. And this one, this area maybe on the corner, I want to do something slightly interesting there. Just so that it's not that boring. Maybe some thickness for that. I like weird design. Stuff that you don't see quite often. And later on we can put more smaller detail like those, but you know, I don't worry about that too much right now. Because I think the first goal right here is just to try to fill in the page, right? Like have a bunch of different ideas first. Because you know, you never know which one would you know, if you are working professionally, the goal of thumbnailing is really use the time efficiently to come up with some interesting idea, but not 100%, you know, finish or commit to anyone, because you are gonna share with your client first anyway. And you know, you can start with some earlier sketch and see if they like it or not, and later on if they like it, you can always, you know, at least they will tell you if they want to see more refined version of that. So yeah, I'm gonna do another one here. And sometimes, you know, it's funny that when I start these, you can see it kind of occupy kind of a space in the page. So sometimes when I do the next one, I will just try to fill in the page, but using that negative space to give me initially interesting shapes. You can see if I outline these, maybe you come up with some kind of a silhouette looks like that. Sometimes, you know, it's just fun to explore like that. V1. Let's do another one. Not sure what I'm aiming for, but I'm just gonna start sketching for now. And the sketching style I like to do is something like these. I don't, you know, I won't be too caught on again like the perspective guideline noted. So my sketching can be more freely express my shapes. um, and just start with somehow more gestural or organic, something that it's not like very boring like boxy stuff. So that way later on when I refine it, if I want to make it more like industrial produce, more like solid form, then it's easy for me to do that. But initially you want this initial energy in the beginning to show the dynamic of your form, right? Like as I'm kind of doing the sculpting, I'm sculpting the form instead of just doing all the boring box in the space, if that makes sense. But right now I'm just trying to design interesting form of that joint and see how I can work from it, because I just like these device that has a quiet dynamic form initially, so that's kind of what I'm thinking right now, and then I can start to think about, okay, where am I gonna place my monitor and all that stuff. Maybe you can do something here. And you can see I started like doing here, but I move away because I don't always have to stick to that shape. But initially, with that limitation, it gives me the ability to come up with kind of this kind of a gesture stuff, right, in that blank area. So that's like a kind of a interesting way to try if you guys want. So there's definitely no limitation but when it comes to doing thumbnail like these, because just because I know that design, this is not a very hardcore design task or things to draw. It's the goal, at least the goal in my mind, is to create visually interesting kind of a sci-fi control panel or monitor or console, whatever you want to say. It's not like I'm solving like a rocket science, how how would I design a certain things work in a very scientific way, right? So right now a lot of freedom here that I'm mostly dealing with just the overall shape and form. That's I don't like what I just did there, so maybe I can have one design here that have a very thick monitor, like those traditional CRT monitor, monitors from the earlier day, not that early, at least from when I grew up. When I was little, I usually the TV looks, or the monitors from like early 2000, right? At least it's just super thick, and I don't know if there's anything like that in here, but something like that, but even much thicker, right? That's quite thin. Like that, the monitor is definitely like super thin, but the old one, it's very thick. It's not good for space. And imagine if you have crazy amounts of monitor that thick, that there will be quite interesting that you need a lot of space for those things. But right now trying to do something interesting. Maybe it has a dual monitor, but it still has quite very thick profile. And I'm doing this in a new layer so I can move things around and see, do I want to attach in a different way, something like that. And since I right now have these, I might just find a way to combine them together, right? Or maybe look at reference C. If there is a more interesting way I can do about it. Maybe just keep it simple like that. Maybe that could be one form. I don't know, let's try. So overlapping here. You can see I'm kind of struggling with this one, so you have to know that not every sketch comes smoothly, you know, because design does take some time, and sometimes when you are experimenting interesting or, you know, kind of a breakthrough idea, things that you don't draw too often, you might, you know, have a little bit more hard time figuring out things. But I think that's a good thing, you know, that's when you are kind of breaking through your comfort zone and trying something that you don't used to do. And that's when you are, you know, start figuring out new stuff and come up with more interesting design, at least, you know, compared to whatever you are used to do. That kind of it kind of sounds like an excuse for me that's, you know, showing good as I'm kind of struggling here, but I guess that, you know, that's to be honest, that's really it is, right? Like, so don't feel like if you know, you couldn't solve the design and every, you know, process need to be like so smooth, so like cool when you're, you know, doing the design. Just, you know, trying to find a way to beat it, as long as you can get through that kind of struggle phase, then you would, you know, you're eventually gonna be really appreciate, you know, that you struggle, but without that, your design will be just, you know, like before. You wouldn't have a breakthrough. So I'm thinking about maybe a monitor can be attached to there and come out with from different direction. Not monitor, but the interactive things. It can be a keyboard, it can be something weird or interesting, you know, maybe I can put buttons like that. But right now let's just, again, keep it just basic form. And then let's see if I can put more volume in here for the joints, just to get more interesting shapes here. I don't even know how this thing would turn, but maybe you need some kind of connection here. But we can always figure it out. At least I like the organic feel, kind of the turning, folding kind of aspect in here, so that's fine. And that could be just a placeholder, right? Like, I know that I want something that's more, you know, elongated rectangle shape. and later I can define the form even better. But yeah, let's keep these just as these, and let's move on. So I can see, I got this form here, so maybe I can do something interesting to follow that or not, but let's see. Let's just, scrolling through my reference. Let's see if I can find much interesting design. Maybe start with that's cool. Even that's cool. But let's just do some scribble first and see what can we get from it. Some kind of a base, right? Make it a little bit smaller. I'm kind of thinking about that, right? At least in my mind. And yeah, I mean, if you are not familiar with the subject, then you definitely have to do some study first. Like, based on whatever you see, you can at least, initially do a one-on-one study. Just draw whatever you see and make sure in your mind to simplify things and kind of break down things in some simple shapes. Right, let's make some rooms here. Let's shrink that a little bit. Let's do it again. Okay. Okay, let's continue. I see the opportunity maybe to do another one that has a very extended monitor. Why not? It's good for the composition anyway. So let's do that. It's up to you if you wanna use the shift key to draw a straight line or just freehand. I like to freehand sometimes, and I like to shift. I do combination of both. It doesn't really matter as long as you get the design on the paper. Then it's so good. Let's do some joints in here. Maybe I can copy that and just put it there and erase that to have some supports here. Let's continue. Just figure out like, okay, I can probably somehow connect to another mass volume here. Right, things can, like I mentioned, when I draw, I'm kind of thinking I'm doing the sculpting. Because when I like this sketch, it doesn't really resolve like how these things are connect together. It can be some kind of a metal support, right, to attach to it, something like the camera you see here, like that. Or it can be more like a one form combined with that form, right? It's just initially I want to place a volume in there, and later I can always find a different way to unify them or introduce more different stuff to combine them together, right? So I don't that way I don't focus too much on the detail, and that's you know, that's something we don't want to do initially. And let's see if we can just do more stuff. Again, even though I'm not familiar with the scale on that, you know, I would kind of constantly going back to my reference and see if I will want to add a smaller piece and how what that looks like and how what interesting stuff can attach next to it, you know. But again, those are details. So it's totally fine, I can just leave it there for now. So maybe that would look like that. The perspective is a little bit off, but that's not a big concern to me because I know what form I'm doing here, you know. So the form is still correct, at least from the viewer, hopefully. But you know, I can always correct the perspective to be perfect later, but right now I can't. I just want to maintain the momentum of creating sketches, right? And to me, that's the most that's the most part which, you know, burn your brain energy the most, which is the actual thumbnail and design phase, because all kind of thinking, all kind of just intense thinking or use your brain is this stage. But once you are, you know, comfortable and, you know, getting comfortable and finish this stage later on, it will be just so fun to just finishing everything, but, you know, being more relaxed. That's part of what I want to say here. Maybe attach some kind of a keyboard things under here. And something probably not the ordinary rectangular shapes. So I want to do something slightly different. Not sure what that could be, but let's try it. Start with, you know, a rectangular form or like a boxy form, because the reason why is the box form it not only showing the plane orientation in 3D, but also showing direction, you know, like compared to when you think about a box in a 3D form, you know that the box has information of all this 3D orientation. If that makes sense. You have that direction, you have that direction, right? In 3D. In 3D means like you have XY plane, you have what else? The YZ plane, something like that. I'm probably wrong with the XYYZ, but 3 planes. That's why we call it 3 dimension, right? So within all that plane, box shapes convey those 3 planes. Whereas a cylinder only tells you that direction, right? Because in here you don't know which one is facing where unless it's box plane, right? There's no plane in here, it's just a round plane, but it doesn't tell you which orientation it is, but box has it. Or even worse, a sphere don't tells you anything, right? Because whichever angle you are looking at, it's gonna still be a sphere. So when you are starting a shapes, I would suggest you start with some kind of a boxy form, because later on you can change the form into whatever you want, but at least it gives you initially three-dimensional information that you need for making more complex design, if that makes sense. That's a weird layout, but I guess it's okay. Maybe attached to another smaller stuff here. Alright, that's fine. Let's see if I want to, let's figure out that space here. So maybe like the reference, it's for mine, it's kind of a see-through, not these see-through, but more of a negative space going on here. Perspective goes here, something like that. And probably some kind of a panel there, right? So the other way you can approach with design is that you can first, based on your reference, and do a quick study, and then based on whatever study you have learned from that study, and do your own design next to it. And of course, in order to become your own design, you need to change certain things to come up with a new direction, or probably like change it slightly and introduce new stuff in there, so become your own design. But it's not wrong that you are heavily inspired by the reference, and instead, like, I think it's always great to use reference in order to create more believable design. If it's too many guessing work, your design might suffer, and people won't understand what you are doing here. So maybe there is an inner shape like the reference, so I can place another form in here, and it has a thickness to it, just like that. Maybe an angle in the back. And that's probably like a computer case or something that give you the power, but it's sitting inside of that outer case, something like that, but not exactly. That would be fine. Maybe some attachment here, I don't know. Let's continue. I think I can do whatever I want right now, because the overall form is there. If you want to add more stuff, I can, but that's not the point right now, right? Let's move on. Okay, there are more room to do, so let's just do it. Let's see if I can find some interesting design based on that. Sometimes I would do that. Lower the transparency. and start figuring out how do I want to deal with this form in here. And somehow in the same perspective, you know, not exactly the same perspective, at least the eye level are similar. So I wouldn't do a, you know, bottom up kind of a camera angle, but more of like that view in general. So things, you know, can feel more organized. Let's just do some scribble again, figure out like the space. And overall, I still want to maintain the similar size. I don't want to go crazy with become like a gigantic control panel. But in here you can see me, I was experimenting even more sketchy feel, but just trying to find how these area can provide me some interesting form. Maybe something like that. Big monitor. Just keep things simple, right? Not sure if you guys can hear some background noise. I'm sorry. There were some outside noise. That's kind of like nonsense detail, right? Like it should have somehow a reasonable, at least arm joints for the monitor instead of just that weird thing. So I'm gonna change that, you know. And this is gonna be a weird one, but I'm just trying to figure out how it's fun to solve things like that. It's kind of a challenge, you know, giving you that form and shapes as a limitation and trying to figure out how do I accommodate that shapes and come up with design that's kind of thinking out of the box, something that, you know, you wouldn't try. Maybe there is. But I think, you know, if I put the keyboard here, a human stand like that, it would be hard to reach, but maybe that could be some kind of examining platform where you place something for this computer to analyze it or something. I don't know. But maybe, yeah, let's do that. Something, yeah, this is definitely a larger one for sure. Just start with simple form. And see, like sculpting right now, I need to kind of figure out like how these things are connected to that extended form there. Kind of box it out, right? Trying to indicate the line that follow the perspective so people can identify, okay, that's something still man-made, like industrial form, but not too organic, so you wouldn't recognize it. But initially, again, you can start with rough sketchy line like that, that's fine. I think my background noise is getting quite louder. I'm gonna pause it. And alright guys, so after we blocking all the proportion and the general designs, so right now I have this speed up process of just trying to refine a little bit. So I decide to just edit what I have here. Sometimes, if you want, you can use this initial drawing as base, and then decrease the opacity and use it as just the guideline, and then create a new layer, and then draw over on top of it to really redefine all the details and lines, just make everything clean. But it might take longer time, so for this demo purpose, right now, sometimes if I want to save more time, I would just continue edit the base construction proportion layout here. You can see me constantly edit the line to be something more defined, and constantly erasing some of the detail that I don't want, and then pretty much just make sure that all the forms has somehow more understandable transition. Because initially when we start on the proportional layout design, they tend to be more like more simple shapes connect to each other, but not necessarily figure out like all the transition and details. So right now I just went ahead and trying to add some transition detail, and also indicate some smaller detail to show the scale more, like those keyboard keys, and some screens has different shapes and forms, like separation of them. And each one, I think, pretty much just take about 5 to 10 minutes more to just redefine those details. And it really depends on, really, if you are working professionally, time is very important aspects for you to kind of plan ahead. If you know that you probably only have like half day to work on these, and initially you were thinking about, okay, I'm gonna do 1 page of thumbnail sketches based on these kind of a sci-fi console design, and you were probably thinking about, okay, maybe I can do like 5 to 8 different designs on this page, but with only half day, which means 8 hours divided by 2, which means 4 hours. You have to plan ahead and see how are you gonna use those 4 hours to finish those 1 page. I think the total time the entire time I spent on these in real time, I think it's about 3 hours, almost 3 hours. I have the first, I think less than 3 hours. So I did the initial blackout within almost 1 hour, and then each one I spent 5 to 10 more minutes to just adding like some more details. So that makes the, like, I guess like 15 minutes more, right? So it's within 2 hours. So but if you save more time, that means you can you save more time initially. You can use those time to do something else. Maybe if you want, you can do some color, some shading, as long as the design is somehow clear. With the support of the reference, it's also very useful too, because if you want to show your client this initial design, but with the support of the reference somehow showing the same aesthetic style, and eventually, they will understand, oh, okay, that's kind of, hitting the target or not. They would, very easily they can spot it, and they will tell you, oh, okay, I like this direction, let's move on. Go ahead and, do the shading, color, all of that. Because essentially this first pass, it's kind of starting, if you share this with your client, it's a good tool to start communicate with each other, right? You can say, I have all these designs, they are not 100% figured out, but at least, we know the layout, we know the proportion, we know how big it is, how wide it is, how, what's the scale of it relates to a person, and how many monitors are there, right? And then in what way we're gonna control these things. We have some keyboard variation and maybe some attached camera device to show just more fun detail to work on, right? So continue, you can see me just further clean up a little bit more and constantly adding some light weights, heavier light weights to indicate, mostly indicating the edge where two different parts meet together. You can creating more heavier light weights, so visually they feels like they are separated. So not everything, like all the forms are more clear represented. And try to avoid every line has the same thickness, because if you do that, it's very easy to, creating a design that visually it's a little bit harder for viewer to understand what's going on. But with the help of line weight, you can kind of planning, oh, I want this object to show in order, for the viewer to see what's the overall silhouette or overall form. And right now you can see, like, mostly the inner detail you can have slightly thinner line, because those area are probably not the most important part. Like, it depends, but if you want to emphasize certain things, that's kind of an important feature of your design, then you can definitely use more heavier lightweight. But if it's just describing, slightly very subtle form change, where there is some smooth or maybe a little bit harder transition, and based on that you can use either heavier or lighter lightweight to indicate that. So just continue, adding more definition on the form. As I mentioned, like sculpting, right? You will have a very basic fundamental form, and once you are good with the proportion, and then you go ahead trying to add more detail, trying to refine the shape more. And that's what I'm doing, as you can see here. In the meantime, not to worry about if each line are lined up perfectly in that perspective angle, because that's not the point, right? Because you know that this is a concept design about, like, just showing the overall direction. As long as the design is clear represented, I think it's good. And since the final product, if you are working for a game, for example, this is kind of a console design for games, then we know that the final product is not the line drawing itself, it's probably gonna pass to a 3D modeler to to model it. And if they need more information than this initial line drawing, they will tell you, okay, maybe we need a turnaround drawings, meaning you might want to pass over a front view, side view, and probably back view as well. And that kind of a production drawing design are, you do have to clarify a lot of the line instead of just hinted some details. I would say whatever you see here, um, it has the overall form, but it doesn't have enough information. For example, like the transition of the form, how the form turning and all that. But that's more of a finalized production drawing. And again, here we are doing the initial thumbnail ideation sketch to show the intention of approaching showing different variations and options for the client to pick from. The things can be slightly more looser, and not everything need to be super refined. Let's continue adding more smaller detail, more recognizable detail like keyboard, stuff like that, so then when people see that, they know the scale of it, right? Like when we see a keyboard, kind of that keyboard panel, it's kind of like the size of wider than two hands can place on there, so you can kind of see that, okay, that's how large this device is. And this one I'm thinking about adding more kind of a compound shapes that somehow, in 3D turn, like creating a new form and then merge them or boolean them together to combine them. So initially they are entirely two different shapes, but somehow, you combine and merge them and create something more interesting form, and that's what I'm kind of doing here. And overall, just within the time limits, I'm kind of counting myself, hey, it's almost the time. Let's read this read it up, right? Like we don't want to spend too much time on the unnecessary stuff. But if you are doing these for your portfolio piece, of course you can take your time and make sure you show if you want to finalize this into very refined design, then go ahead and do it. For personal projects or portfolio pieces, it's more, there are more freedom. And of course, if you are a startup concept artist, you haven't really get into working professionally yet, definitely you want to put more time and effort on showing more polished design. But before you even do that, before you polish your design has to be good at the first place, right? And overall, I tend to add more smaller details because with this method, we start with larger volumes and, we have good amount of large and medium shape, but there are some, more smaller shape that we can incorporate into the design, and that's what I'm doing overall. And once you are, good about the design, then you can see in this process here is I create a silhouette behind it, beneath the line drawings, and it's mostly for presentation purpose to show, everything more clearly, because without the shapes underneath, it might be a little bit hard for the viewer to see the entire silhouette of the objects. So with both of the line drawing and the shading, just flat shading is fine underneath, the presentation can feel much better. And that's pretty much it for this sci-fi console ideation sketch tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you next time.